Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Way Between podcast. I'd like to thank our guest host, Nick Egan, for jumping on today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome, welcome. We were just talking about a little bit before we started here about how this time of year, and I think it might be the same way in Tibetan Buddhism or Tibetan culture, but this time of year, we're coming up on the big Chinese New Year holiday, the Lunar New Year.
hmm
And that's where in Chinese tradition, a lot of it is when it is because there's so much fresh new springtime energy coming in
hmm
and in Chinese culture really value this fresh new energy. So is that similar in Tibetan culture?
Yeah, it is. It's traditional to at least the few days leading up. It's called Losar. Lo just means year and Sar means new. And it usually coincides with the Chinese New Year, although it can be off by one cycle, so within a couple weeks.
Oh.
Which the Tibetan calendar is its own work of art. So it can be challenging in that way. But to your point, yeah, it usually there's purification practices that you do internally. And those are either peaceful,
Mm.
meaning they're focused on peaceful mantras and things like that to purify the energy system, or they can be wrathful, which is like getting rid of any kind of obstacles or blocks from the new year, from the old year, and then stepping into abundance in the new year.
Oh yeah, and you also have some experience learning about Taoist religion too, and feng shui and that kind of stuff as well. Is that,
A little bit, yeah.
yeah.
Not amateur, not professional.
Well, I want to point out for anyone who's not familiar that the Lunar New Year goes with obviously the lunar cycles. It's the second new moon of the new energy cycle. So the first new moon is kind of like just building ground. So we're kind of at mid-spring festival type of thing. So it's
hmm
the peak of spring. So energy transformation, new things coming. In some superstitions that you want to have wear red is exciting. Eat long noodles for long life. Eat fish, that means good luck, and this kind of thing. So, it's a time of year also where you just want to accumulate really good, new, brand new, fresh feeling, right?
hmm
Yeah. So
We
on
have
that,
that we have that even in the West, like spring cleaning, right? It's natural, even though our New Year doesn't really fall in the spring. It's like spring cleaning and getting out with the old, in with the new kind of thing. It's the same intention.
totally, and I always think that's really interesting when you have like a cross-cultural type of synthesis. It just goes to show how much humanity has in common. And I
hmm
think, we talked before, later we'll get into this episode is going to be focused on Lao Tzu, talking about how emptying out this old energy. But I also think it's really interesting hearing about this cross-cultural type of study. I often used to get into touching base on Carl Jung because he showed these archetypes, and I think this is like an archetype of fresh spring energy that goes cross-culturally, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot to be said for if there's a lot of smoke across cultures, there must be some fire.
Yeah, there you go, there you go. Our common humanity. I wanted to talk about Lao Tzu today, similar to how we talked about Siddhartha Gautama Buddha last time, and just give a little bit of the background of his story, where the philosophy enters into his story. So Lao Tzu, as you may or may not know, like I said before, we often talk about in this podcast how we'd love for these topics to be really, you know, accessible for someone who's never heard anything about Lao Tzu before, or also interesting to someone who's even studied Lao Tzu for a very long time. So, on that note, we want to get into the Lao Tzu story and just jump right into where the philosophy kind of kicks off and the way I heard it told and the way it was really, poignant to me when I first heard the story as a, 20s, early 20s in undergrad. So we talk about Lao Tzu. He's you could call it the original thinker of Taoist philosophy, the original sage of Taoist philosophy. There's Taoist philosophy and Taoist religion, but let's just jump right into his story. He was a almost I tell the students in this way, it's like he was like a librarian but also like a keeper of records. I feel like he was a curator of the Smithsonian all in one. So it's almost like ancient Chat GPT, where people would go to ask Lao Tzu any question they had. He had all the wisdom, all the lore, he had all the scrolls, he had all the art was kind of held. He was a keeper. He had this position, this pretty high, lofty position. So of course, he also had a reputation for wisdom.
Mhm.
Does that sound familiar to what you remember?
Yeah, I always think of him as an archivist. Archivist, I
Yeah.
like somebody that holds the archives. And then in the ancient world, it's funny because it not so much these days because with the modern printing press and all of that, but those that had access to written materials were very few and far between. So just the fact that you had access to like all the entirety of the library, of course you're going to spend time reading it, and so you then become quite wise relative to other people. That sort of changed with the printing press, where it's like, oh, anybody can go to the library, although apparently few of us do, right?
You know that while you're talking, it reminds me of my kids just wanted to rewatch Lord of the Rings. So there's a scene when Gandalf goes into the Gondor, the city of Gondor, and goes deep into the archives, and he's researching and going through scrolls. That's kind of like where we can imagine Lao Tzu is hanging out and doing his work and gatekeeping access to this material.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
So he had a reputation for wisdom all throughout Chinese culture at that time, actually. Even, I think is one of the most interesting things that I've learned that Confucius went to visit Lao Tzu.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get into that a different time. But right now we'll focus on Lao Tzu. Basically, he realized and he kind of set this standard, right? Because he realized the country was going downhill. And he's like, that's it, I'm retiring, I'm out. And so it was a big deal. And back then, it was like a walled city, right? And back then, access to the city was closely guarded. There's a gatekeeper that would let good things in and not let any good things out, right? So they want to keep Lao Tzu. They don't want to let him out. So the when Lao Tzu arrives to leave the city for his retirement, arrives at the gate, the gatekeeper first of all says, "Please, Lao Tzu, don't leave us. We need you. We need your wisdom. The we always need wisdom. And so Lao Tzu is like, "No, I'm out of here. It's too crazy. Everything's getting really nasty." And it was going to be he knew he had the insight. The Warring States period was coming. I think it is right.
Yeah.
Um, and so the gatekeeper tells him, please, Lao Tzu, even if you're going to leave, at least leave us with some wisdom. Hmm? Hmm? So give us some words that we can remember you by. Give us some words that we can, have the highest truth. Please, 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 right? So Lao Tzu says, okay. And then he actually right there recites to the gatekeeper this book called Dao De Jing, right? Dao De Jing. This is Dr. Yiwu copy that he edited. But the point is, the first thing the gatekeeper is asking him, please give us some words of wisdom. So Lao Tzu says, actually, in Chinese philosophy, right? We should make a note. In Chinese philosophy, the first thing is the most important. So Lao Tzu, when the gatekeeper said, give us some words of wisdom, Lao Tzu says, the way that can be talked about is not the eternal way, yeah, is the first word that he says. So instantly we have in this Tao Te Ching the first thing that Lao Tzu is talking about, even all these words to describe the way, but actually we can't talk about the words are not the actual way. Right?
Mhm.
Mm. So this book goes in to talk about the Tao in a very detailed, almost mathematical, very precise, very scientific way. The way he writes and the way he describes it is as best he can using words. Nick, do you have any thoughts about this so far?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how I think about the Tao Te Ching from more of a Buddhist perspective, and maybe it fits really cleanly in what I would consider the Sahaja Yana. Yana means vehicle, and Sahaja means innate or inborn or natural. And so you think about things like Zen, you think about, in China, Chan, which had some contact with Taoism, obviously, and then Dzogchen and Mahamudra, which we talk about quite a lot. And it's like even just that phrase of the way that can be talked about is not the eternal way. The Tao that can be talked about is not the eternal Tao. The same thing goes for the wordless transmission of the nature of mind among students. That happens even to this day with people that are practicing certainly within a Tibetan context. And so you can't possibly philosophize your way into it, no matter how much we want to. And I myself personally have been guilty of that, thinking like, oh, well, if I just understand, Madhyamaka, middle way philosophy enough, and then you sort of have the semblance of it, but then all of a sudden there's this moment of a pointing out instruction or something like that where those words kind of collapse in and on themselves. And so even from like even from a relatively worldly type of perspective. Like, for instance, salt, the taste of salt. I can describe to you salt all day long, but if you've never had salt, those are just words. So it's like the words that describe salt is not the eternal salt, is how I would think
Mm.
about it.
Right.
So like even from like a
Great.
relative worldly perspective, yeah.
No, that's really a good way of putting it. So I hope that people can understand that that's what Lao Tzu is trying to help describe an experience, help describe something that exists, something that has always existed, something that is in everything that we can actually have experience of, right? So on the note of going beyond words, we'll spend a lot of the rest of this topic trying to put it into words. So I dare to talk about the Tao right now a little bit because what what Lao Tzu is describing is the Tao, the way, actually is a common word. In China, you go down any city and you'll see this Tao is this like a street, like road. So when Lao Tzu is talking about this Tao is like a street, a path. So Lao Tzu is talking about this path is like sometimes you can think of it, and Nick, tell me what you think of this analogy, that you could think of it as like a stream bed
Mhm,
that it's a path, and what's coming through the path is Tao. Like the
mhm,
stream itself is like Tao. Now, actually, Tao is maybe that's even not very good because what later in Lao Tzu he describes it as what first was there was Tao.
mhm,
Maybe even actually first was empty, then was Tao. So first is empty, then comes Tao. Right?
mhm,
Then after Tao, Tao creates Qi.
mhm,
Then Qi has two sides of the same coin, yin Qi and yang Qi, yin and yang. After yin and yang, you have five elements, and
mhm.
then five elements create everything. So maybe we're talking about the stream bed analogy. Maybe it's better to say that this water is like the one Qi that's going through, and the Tao is like almost like an empty where the Qi can go through. Does that
Yeah.
sound about right?
Yeah, this is interesting. This Taoist cosmology, because it's very similar. It would be fun to do like an advanced podcast talking about like the similarity to the Dzogchen Tantras. I would say, and this is my amateur understanding of Taoism. So there's first empty, there's Wuji, and then there's Qi, and then it splits into five elements and all of that. I would say that Tao permeates even the empty. Like Tao is eternal, and so Tao has nothing to do. Tao is the most rarefied original form of Tao is in the empty. So it's not separate from that. So it's even pre that from a cosmological perspective. And I would say that where people I think get tripped up on this is because Tao can mean both like the reality of things, how we're talking about it now, or the path to experience reality,
Mm, mm,
right?
mm,
So it's like, okay, people get tripped up on am I in path language, like am I following the Tao
mm,
versus like am I experiencing reality as it actually is? And
mm.
Lao Tzu in particular was interesting how he would interplay some of that in some of his in his writing.
So as you're speaking, I'm thinking about or contemplating or trying to sense that it's almost like in the beginning there was nothing,
Hmm.
then God said, "Let there be light."
Hmm.
Or also the Big Bang. And
Hmm.
first there's a vacuum, then suddenly
Hmm.
Big Bang, everything exists.
Hmm.
So there's
But see,
really,
but
but you say
even in
before,
if
before.
we li yeah, yeah. So even if we take that God analogy, right? Like was God pre-existed the emptiness. Like in the beginning it was empty. It wasn't in the beginning there was empty and then God showed up and then did this thing. It was like in the beginning God was there and he saw that everything was empty. In this analogy, Tao is like God, which predates the emptiness of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And so our mentor, Dr. Yi Wu from California Institute Integral Studies, his teacher, John C.H. Wu, was actually Catholic, one of his
Hmm.
teachers. And he translated the Bible. In the beginning, there was Tao.
Hmm. Yeah, right.
So it's
Yeah.
very similar, very similar. So the important thing is how to experience Tao, right?
Hmm.
We don't have to worry or think what came first, chicken or egg. We don't have to worry or think, how do I put Tao into words? How do I argue about Tao? Actually, Lao Tzu later says there's three levels of scholar. Three levels of scholars like this. The first highest level of scholar, they hear about Tao and they want to diligently practice and try to merge with Tao.
Hmm.
Middle level scholar is like they hear Tao and they say, does it exist? Does it not exist? Right?
Hmm.
And the low level scholar, they hear about Tao and they scoff. Oh, Dao, stupid. And say, if if they didn't scoff, it wouldn't be the Dao.
Mhm.
So we should try to be like high level scholars. All of us, all people who are listening, all people on this earth actually should try to be high level scholar. When you hear about Tao, you should try to cultivate and diligently practice. So most important is not does it exist, not exist, details of cosmology. Most important is how to experience.
Mhm.
Now, Tao is difficult to talk about. How to experience is we practice some emptiness and some weakness. We'll get into in a minute. But we also could help learn about Tao and describe Tao by some of its functions and movement. So we often, in Dr. Wu taught, and Lao Tzu says, reverse and return is a movement of the way. Reverse and return is a movement of Tao. So this reverse and return, I think we talked about before, maybe on a different podcast or a different episode of this one. Reverse and return is like your breath goes in, your breath goes out. The waves come in, the waves come out. Tide comes in, tide comes out. Day begins in the morning, goes up into noon, and goes back down to nighttime. Seasons begin in the winter, go up to summer, and go back down to winter. So reverse and return is a movement of the way. So we could begin to have a sense of what Tao is in this natural world.
Mhm.
What do you think about that? Does that sound okay?
I was thinking about, yeah, I'm
We
thinking
also,
about,
while you gather your
yeah,
thoughts, we can also take like, Tai Chi. You go forward, you go back,
yeah,
yin and yang, strong and soft. If something is too young energy, it will exhaust itself and go to full yin energy.
yeah. So I think the yin and yang in particular is describing the natural ebb and flow that you see in out in the world, in nature, like in phenomenon. And when I hear like reverse and return, and maybe in Adam knows this, I have a little bit of a background in Daoist internal alchemy, which is basically like another way of saying internal yoga, right? It's internal alchemy. It's a different type of practice. But when I hear reverse and return, I hear your energy, your internal energy, reversing it from how the normal areas in which it leaks and goes out, and then return it back to the source, which is your yuan qi, your like original energy. And that creates the experience of actually seeing the Tao, which in this case would
Mm,
be the same as experiencing the infinite.
mm, mm,
And so it's a real process in that way, as opposed to, in addition to the natural ebb and flow, which is like in Tai Chi, in really in any kind of fight, it's like the highest point of expression of strength is typically the beginning point of the weakness,
mm.
is another way to think about it.
And okay, so in reverse of that, when we that our mind and our heart and our desire become fully 100% weak, then we are empty to allow the ultimate strength to come in, which emerge with Tao. Then Tao can come in.
Yeah,
We can
yielding.
experience. We can
I would say
experience.
the highest point of yielding, the
Mm,
highest point of yielding or surrender in that is the opening up of the infinite in that way, which is actually similar to like some Western traditions where it's like surrender to God and all of that stuff. Um, yeah, it's easy to talk about. It's unending
And
discussion.
when the reason why it's ultimate strong is because then you're merging with the core of everything in this world, in this universe. If you can experience Tao in yourself, you understand it. You have oneness with all things because all things have Tao in them.
Yeah, in yes, you experience the infinite within yourself, but is it in like is the Tao in things or is the Tao things themselves?
Okay, so the Lao Tzu first chapter actually hits on this, and I'm glad that you mentioned it in that way because then we could get a little more into Lao Tzu first chapter. Because Lao Tzu says being and non-being are two
Right,
sides of the same coin.
right.
So in order to contemplate Tao, I constantly am in non-being. Then I can know the mother of all things, I think it says.
Hmm.
I'm constantly in non-being. Then constantly in being, this physical, I can contemplate the path of all things. You talked earlier about the path. So if I constantly am in being, I can see all things and their path. So this is like their manifestation, right?
Yeah, which is it's another way of saying like form is emptiness and emptiness is form.
Ah,
And like resting in the nature of mind or hear Tao, it's like then you can experience both emptiness and form as two manifestations of the same thing, which is different than saying, Tao is in things, which I think people, the reason I'm bringing it up is I think it's a common misunderstanding. Like the way, if we really take it seriously, that we can rest in something, the mother of all things, and then it's like, well, there's no difference between being and non-being, as opposed to like I'm trying to find the Tao in nature or in a rock or whatever.
Yes, that's really
Yeah.
important that you're saying that. And Dr. Wu did say specifically, and there was a mistake. Carl Jung had a little interview with someone, a Chinese scholar, and came away with the impression that Tao is everything.
Uh-huh.
Tao is everything. But that's weird because it's not like, oh, this book is Tao. So Dr. Wu would say Tao is in everything, make that distinction. But I think it's really important for what you're saying is from a cultivation standpoint, that I'm not searching for something out there or searching for some mysterious thing inside of me. I'm
Mhm.
instantly being and non-being at the same time. I am Tao. I am two sides of the same coin. I have a skin. I also have the universe inside of me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So that's a really good, important distinction. So also, I'm really happy to have you along, Nick, because my experience is Taoist philosophy. I know very little about Taoist religion. I just know more about Chinese cosmology a little bit, in general, but very little about Taoist religion. So it's always interesting to hear your take on that. And your point is taken about the reverse and return. But I think the other important thing, though, we already mentioned, is that the function of Tao is like this weakness, this emptiness. So
Mhm.
Tao is like water. Lao Tzu says Tao is like water. Tao goes to the most humble, lowest places. Tao is the weakest thing in the world, but it can persevere and break through even rock, right?
Mhm.
Tao is always there. So it's another one of these things where when you start learning philosophy in different ways, it's like, what else would I do with my life? If I'm not like learning how to merge with Tao, then I'm just, it's all finite. It's all just dust in the wind. But if you merge with Tao, then you are living connected to something that has always existed and will always exist. So when you're living your life as much as you can merge with that, then your words, your deeds, your actions, everything you do is linked with something that's so beyond you, that can go into anything, that could go anywhere, that is in everything. So this is like where, wow, why would I, why did I ever get distracted from this? This is so important.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is the thing. It's interesting. We should probably talk to a little bit about some of the manifestations of Taoism in China, both ancient and modern. So there's like you've mentioned already, there's philosophical Taoism.
Mm,
There's more of like the cultivation aspect, which is talked about as religious Taoism. And then some elements of that could be like almost ceremonial magic type stuff.
mm,
And there's other things that are like purely internal cultivation, which most people would see as a kind of a meditation or yoga slash meditation. And then there's also like folk Taoism,
yeah.
which is basically like magic. It's magic in beliefs. I mean, some people look at it as superstition, but I really see it as like a folk understanding of magic, and it's how to better your world through relying on natural forces, essentially. And that's the one, and like feng shui, I would say comes out of that to a great degree. It's like the science of not so much folk magic, but the science of the flow of energy around us, right? And the same thing with like you have Chinese medicine, a lot of martial arts. So it really did create this blossoming of these elements that are very popular in even modern culture, modern Western culture today, that all owe its root
Mm,
to Lao Tzu.
mm. This is very, very, very good point. And I think we'll go back and forth now. I see an interplay happening where I'll go into philosophy and you go a little bit into the religion because the philosophy is Tao, Qi, Yin Yang, five elements.
Mhm.
And really important note, weird, weird white people, Chinese people don't want to talk about this thing. They don't want to talk about Tao. It's embarrassing. They shouldn't talk about, right? Actually, in Chinese culture, I don't know if it's still the same way, but Dr. Wu told a story that some Westerner came to China, probably Taiwan actually, right? Republic of China, and wanted to ask people, what is Tao? What is Tao? And no one wants to talk about it. It's embarrassing. They'll just laugh and not want to talk about it. Right? I mention this because Chinese culture traditionally doesn't want to have anything mystical, want it practical, simple. So they won't even talk about Tao. They don't even want to talk about philosophy. But this philosophy is so deeply embedded in everything. So take Lao Tzu philosophy, very practical. Yin and yang. This is in the bones of Chinese culture. Five elements. It's in the food. Literally taking the five elements every day. Spicy, salty, bitter, sweet. They all associate with fire, water. It's different. But yeah,
Yeah, wind,
earth,
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 yeah,
not wind,
and
not
metal.
wind, not wind,
Not wind?
not
No.
wind. Fire, water, earth, wood, and metal is
There you go.
Chinese.
Wood. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. My
Chinese,
bad.
Chinese. No, that's okay. Because Tibetan is wind, right?
Tibetan is, yeah, we have
Yeah.
the five, the Vedic five element. I forgot Chinese five element. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this is deep in the bones of Chinese culture, right?
Hmm.
Chinese medicine, Tai Chi is going back and forth, yin and yang. Just even when I live in China, people value taking rest because they
Hmm.
know you need yin energy and yang energy. It's very important.
Yeah. It's interesting from a cultivation perspective, there are quite a few lineages or traditions that are family oriented, that are both, so I'm thinking of healing, I'm thinking of spiritual, and I'm thinking of martial arts, mainly those three. I'm sure like feng shui also has them, but I'm just not very familiar with them. Where they take the best practices of different elements and they'll put them together as like this family tradition. And it's like great, great, great grandfather did this and had these great results. And so they pass it on as this lineage that is codified. And it's funny because in the West, we don't really recognize that too much. It's just now starting in terms of like the family healing traditions, the family martial arts traditions. I can think of a few. Whereas like in Japan, it was much more common to have like a guild structure.
Mm.
It's like, oh, the grandmaster is this, and he passes it on. Sometimes it's within the family, and sometimes it's outside, but it's like codified. Whereas in China, certainly it was like it still is these family lineages where they may say a few mantras here, do this practice here, and then do these special exercises here, and it's like, wow, that really works. So it goes back to what you were saying about being practical. Like, what's the practical application? Because philosophy is endless, right? But we need to like do some things.
And as you're describing that, what's also coming to mind is one of the last chapters of Dao De Jing. Lao Tzu describes that a village, like an ideal village. So he goes from the most esoteric Dao and goes through the whole entire is it 81 chapters? I should know this. So many details I always forget. I think it's 82, 81 chapters. And then to chapter 81, second to last, it describes as a manifest the ideal village. So
Hmm.
the ideal village, Lao Tzu says, is in the mountains, and people have sharp weapons this on display.
Hmm.
They have elaborate carriages, they just never need to take them out.
Hmm.
Their whole entire life they can hear just over the rooster or the dog of the neighboring village, but their whole entire life they never even need to leave their village, and they can experience the highest Tao just
Hmm.
this way. So it shows a culture that doesn't have that is talented with weapons, has skill with the carriages, doesn't need to use them. It's very peaceful. Don't need to fight, don't need to go anywhere, completely content. Mm.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about this family lineage, is because I think it also shows Taoism, Lao Tzu in culture, just completely content.
Hmm.
You take care of your family, you pass on some skill that they can use to make a living, to have enough. But other than that, you don't need to go seek fame, you don't need to go everywhere. Just very simple lifestyle, very content.
Yeah. It's funny because from a cultivation standpoint, that the meaning of that is a little bit different in the sense that it's a metaphor for chasing after sense appearances. So it's chasing after like
Oh yeah.
sense appearances or spiritual whatever, and like be content. Like the village is you, right?
Yeah.
It's in your so you discover the Tao, the Tao is through resting in the nature of mind, right? Or through the mother of all things is within you, as opposed to like going out and doing a bunch of things. Um, yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot there.
Then you can build your energy, not
Yeah,
exhaust, right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Good,
That's
good.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, then when we talk about the five elements, then each element is associated with a flavor, like
Mhm.
spicy, we talked about before. So there's a whole system built off of this Lao Tzu Taoist philosophy deeply ingrained in all of Chinese culture.
Mhm.
So we talk a little bit about martial arts. I know my practice is Tai Chi Chuan, and it's very much that you the movement, the next movement is in that movement. So you go
Mhm.
out and coming back is already in that movement. So that also tries to embody the movement of the way. Mm.
Mhm.
So interesting point that Confucius, we'll talk about a different time, went to visit Lao Tzu, and he said we could tell more detail, but he said when he met Lao Tzu, he said he didn't know a person could be like a dragon flying in the sky. And if we triangulate what happened in his life after that, we can actually have pretty detailed what's going on. But he says basically you can see that after he met Lao Tzu, then he knew his heaven's destiny.
Hmm.
And then Confucius' life, he stopped chasing after government position
Hmm.
and he just became a teacher. And that's where he became so famous, Analects, and of course all his great work from there. So so Lao Tzu had a very big impact on even Confucius, right? As we go along, we'll also look in a later episode about the second sage of Taoist philosophy is Chuangzi, Chuangzi, and we'll leave that for another time. But I wanted to see if you have any other thoughts about Taoist philosophy, Lao Tzu, before we kind of move on.
No, I mean, I think it's from my study of it, which is relatively shallow. It's like such beautiful writing and poetry. And some of that I think comes from translating Chinese into English. But it's like very poetic, very inspirational. And I always find Chuang-Tzu especially, but
Mm,
Chuang-Tzu and Lao Tzu, going back and reading, it just can be very inspiring for sure. And so I think a lot of people, at least of my generation, a lot of people that go down the road of meditation, that is the entry point in terms of inspiration for them.
mhm.
Whether or not that's the practice, like they don't end up practicing Taoist internal alchemy, but they oftentimes will spark an interest in whatever they're more what's accessible to them.
I'm glad you said that. I think many of us who have been exposed to this felt like it was life-changing.
Yeah, yeah.
And it is an entry point for so many people. Like I dabbled in other philosophy before. I was already second, third year undergrad. I had done research on Buddhism, but when I studied Lao Tzu, Dao De Jing, it was like mind blowing, mind blowing. And
Yeah.
there's so many different translations.
Mhm.
It's very tricky because it's so subtle. But for example, Dao Ke Dao, Fei Cang Dao. That literally just means Dao that just say Dao that can be Daoed is not the eternal Dao.
Yeah.
So Dao Ke Dao, Fei Cang Dao. So it's already in the first line. There's a million of
Yeah.
different translations already, but it always seems to come through. And most translations, you can really catch the spirit of Lao Tzu.
Now, I just want to add to that and like really emphasize, now that I'm thinking about it more, it's funny because in Buddhist, like you could read 1,000 Buddhist sutras and sutras in their original form, they oftentimes can be compiled of like long lists, and then you get to like the really meaningful, impactful part, and it may be 2 pages out of 100, right?
Mm,
And it's
mm.
like it's all meaningful within context, but it doesn't hit you the same way that Taoist writing is so pithy. And so I think that that's the entry point until it takes a little bit more digging to find it. Same thing with like some of the Upanishads, I guess, are a bit more accessible in that way. But it's very good and it's very much in line with, I would say, the Dharmic traditions. And so it's a great entry point for a lot of people.
That's really cool the way you said it because it reminds me. I mean, I think Lao Tzu, uh, takes Lao Tzu Chinese culture. Lao Tzu, you can take pride in the fact it's direct. Lao Tzu
Mhm.
feels so direct. He's talking about the
Mhm.
most esoteric thing, but he's at this gate. He's leaving to retire forever, and he is like, "This is how it's going down.
Mhm.
This is what you need to know." And it doesn't have any fat. Often you see like even Chinese literature when you're reading Chinese literature, it's often just plot, 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 plot. Like so
Yeah,
little fluff, right?
right.
And that's Lao Tzu right here. He's cutting right to the chase. He's getting right into it. So I think that's something that's really interesting there that you're mentioning. It also comes to mind when there's a book that I just only glanced over, but it's really become very meaningful to me as an image. I think we talked about before. It's called The Transcendent Unity of Religions by Frithjof Schuon. And the way he describes it is that at the highest level, religion is just like light,
Mhm.
like a bright light. And then as you go down, it's like a prism.
Mhm.
going down lower and lower level to see different colors,
Mhm.
right? So as you're mentioning the other traditions, we can go digging through and we'll see that bright light, right? The highest level of the religion. Even we talked about before in a different episode, even in Christianity, there's some really high level mysticism, right?
Mhm.
That points to that kind of light. Um, but I think what does make Lao Tzu stand out is how direct it is.
Mhm.
And Lao Tzu himself is very calculated, mathematical, almost scientific. And then we'll see later, Chuangzi is just very literary, just to have these images seared into your mind that just blow your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I did want to make the connection is that this we mentioned in the beginning that Lao Tzu as a practice, and I hope we kind of been saying it throughout the whole episode. I think it's coming through that Lao Tzu as a practice is empty, decrease, decrease your will, decrease your thought, decrease your desire. Then you could be more content, but also then at some point you could make space. You make
Mhm.
space to see Tao.
Mhm.
So I think this, I wanted to have this episode at this time of year. So this is January, as a beginning of February 2026. We're entering now very soon the year of the horse. Nick and I are both horses. You're a horse, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's a whole different, cosmology type of situation going on there. But what any of us can do, no matter what our sign is to make space for new energy to come in. So if we practice Tao in this way in our life, in our house, we're spending this last week or so before Chinese New Year just emptying things out, making as much space as we can.
Mhm.
So we also mentioned at the beginning of the episode that that's a that goes across many traditions. But yeah, so are there any practices specific like household practices in Tibetan Buddhism that remind you of that?
Yeah. So again, it in Tibet, there's a little bit more of a focus on maybe the internal, the practitioner. So
Yeah.
you're burning off any kind of negative karma. So I would suggest things like, go to the sauna, go do something like physically rigorous to kind of burn through something, and then start the new year fresh. That'd be number one. And then number two, there are like just kind of classic spring cleaning things. Clean up your house, get rid of your clutter, go through your closets, get rid of all that stuff, and then any kind of smoke. There's very much the same kind of idea with like smudging, right? Whether it's
Mm-hmm.
incense smoke or in Tibet, there's a lot of juniper types. We powder juniper, which is just a form of incense. So smoke, the idea is smoke, and you open your windows and it kind of cleans everything out.
Nice.
That's very much alive and well. Yeah.
Nice. And I'm really glad you're saying that because what it's reminding me of is the reason why you do it in Chinese culture is because once a new year hits, you don't want to cut, you don't want to burn, you
Mhm.
don't want to clean. You want to let at least for the first day, all that fresh, brand new energy accumulate. You don't want to
Yeah.
sweep it away. You don't
Right.
want to cut it. In fact, really what this goes along with, we call it Lunar New Year because it goes along with the lunar cycle. So it's the
Mhm.
new moon. So the
Mhm.
new moon, every new moon brings fresh energy. And
Mhm.
if you contemplate life and yourself and see and merge with this movement of the moon, you can see every new moon is a little different. The
Mhm.
world feels a little bit different. And that's where this Tao is so wonderful and beautiful because it's like this the saying is it's like a stream. It's always there, but it's always different.
Mhm.
So Tao is always changing, always cycling through, always bringing fresh perspective, always bringing fresh energy. Previously, Nick and I, when we were talking, he said, kind of like this too shall pass. Things will always change. Things will always change. And the idea is how do we cultivate to harmonize with change? I remember when I was working at Sonoma Country Day School, one of the field trips was to a Daoist temple in Chinatown. And I'm sure you went on this field trip.
Mhm.
And it was the year of the monkey was coming. This was the most striking I've ever seen a year. Okay, 2016. Okay. And the lady, I'd already been there at least one or two times before for different field trips. But this year of the monkey, when we arrived, she was telling the students, just be very diligent this year. Focus on your study, take care of your health. Everything will be fine if you just do what you should do. Focus on your study. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. She's a little different. She has more urgency this year.
Mhm.
And man, that year personally, and I think globally with a cuss show.
Yeah.
It was the monkey energy. The monkey comes and just shakes everything up like the Monkey King,
Yeah.
bashing away heaven. And so that year just turned everything upside down in my own personal life and I think globally. So that was the first time where I really noticed that, there's these different energies that come. I had noticed it subtly with the moon, but I didn't really ever see like years are can be so different. I think we all can sense if we think about it enough that each year has a different characteristic.
Mhm.
And that year was the most palpable, where the monkey was just coming and causing a cuss show.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's the lady at the temple had a really good point that I think is important to remember as we move on to the in like every day, actually, every day, every hour, every minute, all the way to every year, to every 60-year period, which is,
Mm,
12 animals times the five elements.
mhm.
There is a different flavor and a different energy to it. But if you do the things that you need to do and face the things that you need to face, then those years don't have to be calamitous for an individual level, right? Or like what seems like a calamity for one is actually a blessing to another. And so it's important to remember there are no bad constellations. All constellations are good. All astrology is good, and it's just for us to like harmonize with them.
Yeah, because monkey came and changed everything up, but this okay. Now we can transform, try something new.
Exactly. Yeah,
But this
exactly.
this I think we'll leave it on this final point that we talked about in the first episode of the Way Between podcast that we can just practice by using simple yin energy or yang energy. Anything that comes to your life, you can harmonize it. Okay, maybe I need to get some fresh, exciting energy to challenge and face this and fight it and give some speeches and get my energy up. Or maybe I need to chill out, let it pass by, don't attach, just let it wear itself out or don't feed it. We
Mhm.
talked about this before, and I think it's really important to mention again right now as we approach a new year that we can solve any problem that comes with us in the year of the horse with yin energy or yang energy.
Yeah, good. Well said.
Okay, well, so anyway, I want to thank everyone for stopping by the Way Between podcast again today, and I thank Nick so much for coming
Oh, it's
and always
my
appreciate
pleasure.
your insight.
Yeah, very fun. Appreciate you having me.
So anyway, everyone, have a great beginning of the year of the horse, and we'll see you next time.